Hey, hello and welcome all. My name is Marie-Claude Côté from Canada, currently on personal leave from Library and Archives Canada. I am pleased to moderate the first panel of DCMI Virtual 2021 on metadata and privacy. We will start with the panel with David Haynes, lecturer at the Edinburgh Napier University in the UK, with a presentation entitled Metadata Can Kill. Our second speaker will be Harshvardhan Pandit, research fellow at the ADAPT Center at the Trinity College Dublin in Ireland, who will introduce us to the data privacy vocabulary. And last but not least, we will hear Marlene McRae, manager in the Government of Ontario in Canada, who will share with us the Ontario government context for metadata and privacy. I invite you to consult the conference program website for full details about our speakers and the session summary. Here is how I will conduct this session. So our speakers will present one after another for roughly 45 to 60 minutes, and a question and answer period will follow right after. Please feel free to send your questions as they come using the Zoom chat function. Make sure to send your questions to all participants. If you send to hosts and speakers, it's for technical questions only, so I won't see your questions. Without further ado, let's welcome David Haynes. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate. It's been an ambition for quite a long time to come to a DCMI event, and it's somehow never quite happened because of other commitments. So I'm really pleased to be here. You can see in the background, it's a virtual background, the bridge across the Firth of Forth, which joins Edinburgh to the Kingdom of Fife. So that's just a little bit of local scenery for your information. I'm just now going to share my slides. So I'll bring those up. Can somebody just confirm that they can see the slides okay?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much, Marie-Claude. I'll just minimize that window. So I've chosen a slightly alarmist start to this, and it's really intended to make us think about some of the implications of the way in which we use metadata and some of the consequences of the ways in which metadata is used. So I want to just go through some of the examples and some of the issues that arise when we use metadata, and particularly in relation to privacy. And what happens when things go wrong. I hope there will be a balance from other speakers. I will say also the views that I'm representing tonight are my own personal views. They do not represent the views of Edinburgh Napier University, nor do they represent the views of the research groups that I belong to, Hazel Hall's Centre for Informatics, Social Informatics, and Bill Buchanan's Blockchain Lab. So these are just my own initial thoughts. They're not particularly research-based, but they are intended to generate some thinking about the whole issues about metadata use. And I'd like to just start with a quote, which was widely reported in the press. This was General Hayden, who was the former director of the CIA and also at the NSA. And he, I don't know whether it was a boast or not, but he said, "We kill people based on metadata." Now that might sound very extreme and alarmist and so on, but actually I think there's a lot of truth in that. And that's really what I want to focus on. That was quoted in a report that Amnesty International wrote back in 2014. I also want to talk about some of the, or look forward to some of the ways in which we might handle these issues as well. So there have been people warning us about the dangers of misuse of metadata for a long time. And journalists such as Duncan Campbell, there are apparently two Duncan Campbells this is the younger of the two, back in the 1980s, was raising the alarm about mass surveillance by the government central communications headquarters in England. And that's an intelligence agency that monitors routinely, particularly international telecommunications. In 2013, more recently, Amnesty International highlighted some of the problems with drone strikes in Pakistan, and again made a connection between the use of metadata and being able to target individuals. And then, of course, Edward Snowden's revelations about the NSA large-scale surveillance of communications within and out with America was, again, probably no surprise to some people, but certainly has had an impact that continues to roll on. And so I'm drawing on some of that kind of experience and so on. So some of the examples that we can come across are things like targeting individuals, control of public dialogue and suppressing activity, particularly with democracy campaigners, state-sponsored actions, infrastructure attacks, again, maybe using metadata and maybe using personal information in order to do that. And then use of metadata by cyber criminals, and that can also have a devastating effect, particularly if it affects infrastructure that people depend on to survive, such as in hospitals and health services. So here is an example of targeting individuals. I've downloaded some images from the Creative Commons just to lighten the kind of presentation a little bit. So when we're looking at some of the drone strikes that have occurred, some of those have been targeted by identifying individuals through their telephone activity. So if you're routinely monitoring telephone traffic, you know where the telephone is, you know who it belongs to. That could be construed as private information, personal information, and you can use that then to target those individuals. And that has been done to devastating effect. That's been going on right from the Iraq War onwards. So President Bush was one of the initiators of that kind of activity, but that carried on with enormous enthusiasm with subsequent presidents. So people like President Obama really upped the ante, and it continued on under Donald Trump. So it's something that actually all flavors of government in the States have adopted as their approach to doing that. And of course, the claim is that they're targeting specific individuals rather than doing carpet bombing of an area. But as we've learned subsequently, there's been a lot of collateral damage. The mistakes happen. People are around the targeted individual, and so that's had a tremendous effect on local populations. And it could be argued that that kind of activity has generated a lot of resentment and perhaps even recruited new people to some of the terrorist campaigns that have been going on. So there's a real concern there, but very well established link between metadata about telecommunications, about phone calls and so on, and targeting individuals through drone strikes, for instance. Many of us will remember the Arab Spring and all of the activity that went on there. And a lot of the protests were coordinated through social media until some of the regimes cottoned onto that and started monitoring the social media, sometimes also encouraging people to sign up to different groups and then pulling down their metadata and identifying people who would then, they would then go on to arrest. So again, metadata is being used in an alarming way in order to suppress democracy. And there is a concern that maybe that's the kind of thing that is going on behind the scenes in other jurisdictions, not just in the Middle East or with the Arab Spring in 2011 and subsequently. There were well-documented cases where there was a democracy movement in Iran, and again, the authorities very quickly seized on the social media and were able to identify people and imprison them, and so suppress the activity. So again, that's something we need to be alert to. And I think we also need to be careful about pointing the finger and saying, oh, that's their problem and not ours, because it's all too easy for democracy to start swinging into authoritarianism, where a leader thinks that they've got a monopoly on the way in which things should be done. They may start off with good intentions and then see anybody who opposes them as being a threat to the state. And then we've got attacks on the infrastructure, and again, using metadata, maybe not privacy information, but it could be. So a well-established route into systems is by gathering data about individuals who may be employees of an infrastructure company, of electricity or the water companies, or whatever infrastructure you're trying to target. And that can provide a point of entry. You might do spear phishing in order to, so you're sending an email targeting that individual in order to get an entry into that organization, maybe depositing some malware on their system and then having a route into the systems. So again, we can use metadata in order to discover things about individuals that provide us with an entry point if we are a malicious agent into those infrastructure companies, and then disrupt them by whatever means. And there is some evidence to suggest that that is done in a very systematic way by state-sponsored operatives, where there's a hostility between one state and another. So there's a lot of speculation. It's difficult to prove, and very often you might find that that it's not direct employee of a state, but it may be somebody who's under their protection. And then, of course, there's cyber criminal area, which we're kind of bordering on when we're looking at attacking the infrastructure. But usually the motivation here is financial, that criminals want to break into systems in order to hold them to ransom by using ransomware software or introducing malware or some other kind of activity, or indeed by some kind of fraud. So getting into a system and then changing the financial data so that funds may end up in an account that the criminal controls. And again, they may do that over an extended period. And in order to do that, they need to cover their tracks. So they may be manipulating the metadata to hide the audit trail of their activity on the system. They may be masquerading as somebody who's already employed by the system and has a bona fide identity in the system, but they're either manipulating the metadata or pretending to be somebody so that the data trail doesn't point outside the organization. And indeed, if you can cover your tracks, then you can continue to perpetuate the fraud over a long period of time. So those are just some examples of the way in which personal data that's in the metadata records can be used to ill effect. So what do we need to do about that? And this is something which is maybe for discussion afterwards, but I'd just like to put forward a few ideas. One idea is the idea of due process and the rule of law, that it is not acceptable to have extrajudicial killings, for instance, no matter what the justification. So targeting individuals with drones is an extrajudicial killing. You haven't taken somebody to trial. You haven't given them an opportunity to defend themselves. You haven't checked that the information you have is actually accurate. So it hasn't been tested by that due process. So, you know, taking shortcuts is a danger, and it leads to many problems later on. There has to be a sense of independence, and again, we've seen that happening in some parts of the world where the judiciary is being controlled by the government, and they're not able to make independent judgments about what's going on, and that's absolutely essential for the rule of law. So it's no good saying, okay, there's been an extrajudicial killing, but we're going to have one of our appointees take a friendly look at that and make an appropriate judgment that lets us off the hook. Upholding and protecting privacy. People like Daniel Solov, whom I think quite a number of us have come across, has done quite a lot of work looking at the conflict between privacy and security. And he says, well, it's actually a false division, that the two are tied together, and that you can't have a secure society if you undermine people's human rights. And one of those human rights is the right to a private life. And actually it's counterproductive, because A, you get people's backs up, so you're more likely to get people trying to undermine the government, but also you're actually destroying the thing that you're trying to protect, you know, in a free and fair society. And then regulation, that's a very controversial area, but there are signs that things are changing in, particularly in the United States. I think in Canada, there's a well-developed regulatory framework. In the United Kingdom and in Europe, there are well-developed regulatory frameworks for private information and for privacy. But there may be an issue about enforcement. That it's one thing to have a law or to have a regulation in place, but it's another thing to actually implement that and to enforce those regulations in a fair and equitable way. So I think those are things to think about when we're thinking about metadata. And I'd just like to finish by saying, you know, I don't think metadata is a bad thing. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it just is, but it can be used for good or harm. Probably most people don't set out to use it for harm. They may have good intentions, but that can lead to harm. Thank you. I hope I haven't gone over the time that was available, but I shall now stop the share.
No, that's perfect, David. Thank you very much. You have certainly raised our level of awareness about different usage of personal information and metadata, and certainly increased my level of paranoia in the process. Thank you, David. Let's now welcome our second speaker, Harshvardhan Pandit. Arch, over to you.
Thank you. So just Harsh is fine. I know my name is a bit weird and difficult to pronounce. It used to be a sense of pride when I was a kid, but as I grew up, it just ended up becoming an annoyance. So I'm going to be talking about data privacy vocabulary, and now I'm wondering if David has shown weapons exist, and this is going to be the ammunition with which you harm people. But let's carry on ahead and see where this goes. So in a nutshell, data privacy vocabulary is a vocabulary which helps you inform or represent what is happening with your data. Where is it going? Where is it coming from? What is it being used for? Who is using it? Under what legal justification, etc., etc. And this came out of one of the European projects called SPECIAL. So it has its own full form of acronym, but the short form is SPECIAL. And it was about GDPR compliance. And in order to show that something is compliant, in order to show how that the consent was collected and what the companies were doing with it, they wanted to create a vocabulary. And once they had created that vocabulary, they wanted to open it up to a community so that it can carry on being enriched and developed in real world settings, which is why they created a community group called Data Privacy Vocabularies and Controls Community Group under the W3C umbrella. So it's an open community group. You can join, you can leave, you can see the public mailing list. And the mission of this group is to create such a machine readable vocabulary which will help people describe what their data is, where is it coming from, all of the things that we saw on the first slide. So what is this metadata about data? So to keep things short, because of the format, there's a few things that the law requires people to specify when they collect data or when they use data. And this is universal across all the global jurisdictions. So no matter if you're in America, or if you're in Canada, or if you're in Europe, or if you're in Japan, or if you're in India, all of the laws tend to use the same terminology, the same kind of restrictions and requirements. So we decided to kind of narrow down and say, okay, this is what all laws represent. Can we create a core vocabulary out of those? So the result is that you have things like purposes. Why are you using this data? To what ends? What's the goal? And how do you get there then becomes the processing operations. How do you collect it? How do you store it? How do you share it? At what scale? Where is this data coming from? And then finally the question, what is the data itself? So even if you only talk about metadata, there's so many different things that surround where did you get that metadata? Why are you using it? Are you only going to use it for that? So even within these three concepts, you have a lot of questions and a lot of complexities. And to make things even worse, there's more. So now you also have to consider what technologies you're using in all of the previous three things. So if you are, for example, collecting data directly from me, what technology are you using for that? Do you give me a form? Do you ask me to write it on a piece of paper? Do you infer that data from something else? And then there's practical considerations for where the data is being stored, for how long, in what shape and form. If it's somewhere outside in some jurisdiction where the government can readily snoop, is that an issue? So this brings us to more legal concepts, as in who is controlling the data, who is operating on the data, and these kind of vary by each country and each jurisdiction. For example, in the US, you don't really have a data controller, you have a company, but in the Europe, you have very specific obligations for when you try to do something with the data and you say, okay, I'm a data controller. Whereas, for example, now in South Korea, you have the notion of a data controller, which is different from that in Europe and America. So even though the terms may be the same across different countries, the way they're interpreted is different. So how to restructure this in a way that everyone can use it, it's basically impossible. So what the data privacy vocabulary does, it says, okay, you express things in a way which makes sense in your use case without worrying about the jurisdiction right from the start. And then later on, when you want to say that, oh no, by data controller, I mean, as per this country's regulation, you extend that concept. It's pretty much the same way DC terms got extended to first say, okay, bibliographic information, then historical information, then you had other extensions, then DCAT was formed, then DCAT AP was formed. So you see these extensions, but you have now a base vocabulary, a common terminology for everyone to say, hey, I am responsible for how this data is collected, where it is stored. And then you have the legal justification on what basis, like is this permitted by law? If yes, reference the specific clause. Now, when we got here, we ran into kind of a tricky situation because some countries do not give specific legal clauses to say that this is permitted. They only declare what is not permitted. So which means that you can do anything you want as long as it is not prohibited by law. Whereas in some other countries, you can only do things that are permitted by law. So you have to select one of those. And so far the DPV says, no, you cannot specify something which is not present in law. Like you cannot say this is permitted because I cannot show you that it is prohibited. Then you get into a philosophical logical argument, which kind of only makes sense on Friday evenings in a pub. But in the real world, you want to be as clear as possible. This is based on your consent. This is because you signed terms and conditions. This operation is required because the law requires me to do KYC when I open a bank account. So we only deal with specifics. We don't deal with abstracts. So the end result is that we now have a taxonomy of concepts, of purposes, data categories, legal basis, which we then expand into vocabularies. So each of the things that you saw on screen is expanded into a taxonomy of 20, 30, sometimes 150 terms, which you can use in your use case, which you can extend if they're not fitting. And we formalize this using RDF because that's probably the most sensible way of expressing such a taxonomy. And we are still expanding quite readily and quite heavily. So this is still the third iteration. And we aim to get to version 1, which means that it's stable for the real world use case in the next 2 years, probably. The state of the art for this kind of vocabulary is almost non-existent. The closest you have is the ISO standard, but it does not deal in specifics. It only deals in very high level concepts, which do not readily adapt to a use case, and you cannot like adapt and expand them. So the idea was, okay, can we provide a global common vocabulary for people to express what is happening with their data, to help machine readable tools, to help people make decisions, or to help organizations make sure that their operations are consistent with the law, with social norms, with ethical norms. And in order to provide specific features, we then create extensions of the DPV. So right now we have an extension for GDPR, but we also are working on extensions for specific domains, such as if you're in a government, you have a very specific way of doing things. If you're in the health domain, if you're in the finance sector, you have your own terms, your own vocabularies. So you require a separate extension because it's a separate vocabulary than what everyone tends to use. So at the end, we have a variety of different concepts in terms of how they're used. So this is based on a very kind of back paper napkin study of how many concepts and their relevance in different use cases. So you have your common privacy policies, which you go to a website, you open up a wall of text and you read, or at least you try to read, and then what concepts are mentioned there. So it's mostly, we use something for X, Y, Z. So it's just the purposes and personal data with very little other information. Whereas the law itself is heavily talking about legal basis and something about purpose, but not still much about processing. But then you have some laws like the CCPA and its extension, the CPRA in California, which heavily talk about only a few concepts. And then you have ISO, which is super, super heavy about processing because it describes a lot of technical detail, a lot of architectures, a lot of ways you can share and format data and how that data is sensitive and how it can be encrypted. But it doesn't care at all about what the legal basis is because it doesn't fall in its scope. So even at a high level, you see that there's a lot of variance in how different people want to talk about the same use case, the same data. And this is not even considering what the individual thinks about their privacy. So what terms do they want to use? It differs from individual to individual. So with that in mind, DPV is your low-level vocabulary. You have to build on top of it to make things possible. So if you wanted to build privacy policies, you have to take concepts and say, okay, what should my privacy policy contain? What should my organizational policy contain? So rather than starting at the high level and saying, okay, we want to create a vocabulary just for privacy policies, we opted to start at the bottom so that once that bottom is stable, it's clear, you can readily build things on top. Others can readily build things on top. So we have a variety of use cases, and this is all from people's publications the way companies are currently using DPV. So you have a variety of different approaches, which technically all use the same metadata vocabulary, which are interoperable, which is open, and which you can readily extend into other domains. So if you recently updated your apps in an iPhone or on your Mac or an iPad, you now see that the App Store apps have a little label that says data about you, data links to you, data used to track to you. So this is the start of where metadata becomes a powerful entity in realizing what data is being used, how it relates to your privacy. But we think that it's not enough. We need to do more. We need to provide people the ability to say, oh, I don't want to bother reading and thinking what it means. I want agents that act on my behalf. You go to a website, I don't want to interact with the consent dialog. I just want to say, oh, yeah, this fits. When I say my data can be used for analytics, but not for advertisements, yeah, this is what it is. Don't bother asking me again. So in order to get there, in order to make all of this fancy AI tools possible, you need a vocabulary. So that's the grand vision for DPV. And I'm happy that David mentioned Daniel Solov's work, because he provides a very nice taxonomy of how privacy is broken down into different concerns. And not all of them are security-based, not all of them are as apparent as we think they are. So the challenges in making use of DPV is overcoming this localized perspective. Like if you're in the EU, you should only care about what the EU terms are. If you're in the US, you should only care about what the US terms are. If we want privacy, we have to take things at a global level, which means that you actually do need a global metadata interoperable vocabulary, because your services are not local, your services are global, the internet is global. And when we think about this, it's not just about legal compliance, because you can say that I'm legally compliant and still not be privacy friendly. So how to extend this to people's perception of privacy is something that the DPV still struggles with. And maybe we'll get there, maybe not, but at least we have a start. The other thing then is to connect these to actual real world things, like your cookies, your databases, your actual files, the way your smartphone connects to some server in a country that you probably not even heard of. So how to represent all of these things is a big, big challenge, because it requires agreement between too many different people. And the aim of DPV is to ensure that whatever goes into DPV is complete and correct. So the end result is that this is basically a work in progress, a great ambition. And maybe in 2 years, I will have a keynote at DCMI saying, hey, we are finished. And now you can say that this is how I represent my privacy. So if you're curious about how DPV works and what is present in it, you can go to the wt.org NSDPV link, and all of the stuff is open. It's on GitHub. You have issues, you have the mailing list, and you're very welcome to participate. So I look forward to the Q&A session after, and Marlene's presentation before that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harsh. The data privacy vocabulary is a work of great significance for both the metadata community and I'd say the community of individuals concerned with their privacy. Very small group. And keep going. We're looking forward to your presentation in 2 years. You promised that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's welcome our third speaker, Marlene McRae. Marlene, the screen is all yours. Oh, I think you have to unmute your microphone.
There we go. You
Works
can hear
fine.
me now. Excellent.
Yes.
I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, there we go. So firstly, thank you. Thank you, Marie-Claude, for this amazing event, and also all the organizers who've come together in order to put this on. Really much appreciated. I think the other piece before I begin, I think similar to David, that I just wanted to note that this presentation is my own views and based on my own experiences, not those reflective of the Government of Ontario, as well as the Ontario Public Service. So my presentation is going to focus on essentially how the Ontario government, Ontario Public Service has utilized metadata, as well as in addition to any of the privacy and security safeguards that are currently in place around that. So in just a little bit of a background, the Government of Ontario has various types of information that it utilizes to support decision-making based on data. It also makes information readily available to the public. Technology, as we all know, are rapidly evolving, and the OPS has been moving towards a more digital environment. A current challenge in government right now is that information is still primarily dispersed. So there is an opportunity. The client perspective is really wanting to have access to information when they want it, how they want it. So that's something that currently the government is working on. In terms of information, how it can be managed more appropriately, effectively, and efficiently. Also in reducing duplicated efforts, that's something that is definitely in the Ontario Public Service. There are multiple systems in which ministries, Ontario ministries are operating under. And so that is an area of exploration as well. In terms of drivers for this, like Ontario, essentially many jurisdictions are facing unprecedented opportunity. Essentially, our technology and financial changes, as well as increased public expectations, are really enablers to finding better and more efficient ways of delivering services across the board. So one major driver, and you may have heard of this, is essentially the Simpler, Faster, Better Services Act that the Government of Ontario highlighted in their strategy released in April 2021. It was intended essentially to facilitate the delivery of more of a digital government in terms of services that it provides. Okay, so in terms of the OPS, really, I know that David had touched upon a little bit about data governance previously. And so the OPS does have data governance, accountability, and privacy protections implanted as well. In terms of this portion, the OPS, each ministry has access and privacy offices. And really that's to provide and handling access to information responses, as well as from an operations perspective and policy area for the information privacy and archives to provide that advice and guidance from that view. There are record-keeping access and privacy and security communities of practice. I know it's not highlighted here, but it's something that we readily utilize in terms of sharing information and also best practices. It is across jurisdictions as well as the federal government. So for example, in the space of metadata, as well as not just metadata itself, but also as data sharing, any topic that's really relevant in the access and privacy space. There are data analytics shops as well in terms of expertise with protocols, and our information and information technology, so our I&IT clusters, deal with the infrastructure to safeguard the information, and that includes metadata as well. In terms of the Government of Ontario, there are security measures specifically around threat risk assessment, that's identified for projects and initiatives going through an architectural process of governance, and that's on any new and existing project or initiative as well. So in terms of the privacy safeguards specifically, once identified with personal information or sensitive information, a privacy impact assessment is conducted. And I think Arsh, you did talk about mitigation plans in your presentation as well. I did see that in a line there, and that's very critical to identify and also address any privacy issues around information as a whole. Obviously, there's record keeping requirements in there as well in terms of best practices. And with any metadata, there are the potential of privacy breaches. So we do work very closely with the Information Privacy Commissioner of Ontario's office in terms of privacy breach reporting, as well as any tools or guidance that they have for the Ontario government around privacy breach protocols. In addition to that, there are training tools and resources, both on the privacy side as well as security, to ensure that government employees and provincial agencies are aware of their obligations and to protect the information that they have in their possession. So there are three main metadata standards that the Government of Ontario does have very specifically. And I wanted to point out that GO ITS, so Government of Ontario Information Technology Systems 46, essentially has been derived really out of the elements from the Dublin core metadata standard. So it has been quite instrumental in building and shaping standards in the Ontario government as well. We do have a metadata standards working group, and they are really comprised of groups or members across the Ontario Public Service, such as the Archives of Ontario, as well as various other ministries. So for example, Open Government is a part of that as well. And they are currently looking at how they can have more commonality and consistency among the metadata standards that they have here outlined. So here is just what I just mentioned here, the connection with the Dublin core metadata standards, really leveraging what already exists and the great work that has been done already. So end-to-end life cycle, here in general, we do have managing platform in terms of all the information that comes forward, and that's through an enterprise content service platform. Essentially, it's to provide end-to-end integration here for all the government information that's in our possession, particularly records management. Again, I mentioned how systems are very different, very dispersed across and for various reasons, obviously from the business lines, from the ministries that are serving Ontarians. And this particular platform has the ability to have application interfaces or APIs in terms of connecting to other systems. So metadata in action, just wanted to highlight really briefly one example of metadata and how it's been used for essentially the public good as well as staff on that end as well. And it's the electronic document management model. Essentially, it was developed by the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, so MCCSS, as part of their social assistance reform mandate. And really, it centers around transforming client documents that arrive through multiple channels. So that could be in person as well as paper-based and digital formats. It's really utilized to have a cohesive area in order to digitize information. And that's something that's relatively, I think, more recent as we move more and more to a digital service age, if you will, in the government. I know the private sector has had quite some time to evolve, but government is also moving forward with the digitization of records. I think a couple of strengths here just mainly is really about the consistent approach to document management and imaging, specifically around retrieval of electronic documents. Obviously, there is metadata. I believe there was 60 metadata components there as part of this model. However, the Ontario government essentially has followed, as its PI. It's really provided those protections in place that I mentioned earlier with security and privacy to ensure that it's basically minimized the risk. So this is just some, again, more system efficiencies, but really, I think it's focused on the employees In terms of the public, to me, it's really about providing more efficient service. Prior to the pandemic, I mean, this has been instrumental in terms of electronic means and protecting, obviously in a privacy protected and secure manner. But those recipients are able to upload information in a digital format. I know it shouldn't be revolutionary, but we are catching up. And so we are moving towards that way. So in terms of next steps, the OPS is continuing to explore other opportunities to enable more digital services in a privacy protected manner. So we did talk about, or you may have heard about, Ontario Digital Service, for example, and some of the projects and initiative that they've released in the news as well. And as well as continuing to work with our internal and external stakeholders. We do have quite a few that we do consult, have ongoing discussions with around appropriate next steps in the metadata space. I only mention that because I know that there's areas to be explored further in terms of not just what they mean, but in terms of the research behind it. So automated decision-making, AI, there's a lot of these areas that are becoming more and more relevant right now in this day and age. And we have to definitely be equipped and seeing what other jurisdictions, for example, have done that's out there. What are their lessons learned and where are their gaps and what can we do collectively to have those conversations for better outcomes. Ontario is also working to strengthen the transparency and accountability by improving access to information as well as responsible use of personal data. One example here, although maybe this portion of it might be out of scope, but there could be some things that come out of the consultation paper, for example, we just had out on private sector privacy reform. I think that sort of lends itself to, a broader conversation about, what needs or maybe not in legislation. I think Harsh, you had sort of touched upon that just a little bit around the legislative part. And I think in terms of with that being said, if there are any questions, I know we're holding it to the end here, but I've just provided my direct contact information if anyone wants to contact me in the Information Privacy and Archives Division. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. As we know, government is a complex structure with complex challenges. And it seems to me that the government of Ontario has spared no effort to address the challenges of privacy with respect to metadata. So certainly a model to follow. Thank you. These were excellent presentations. And I'd like to echo this comment by Tom. So let's give a virtual round of applause to our speakers. This panel was splendid. And yes. And my grateful thank you to you three for your time and dedication. And I would also like to thank our technical team, Tom, Nishad, and our, I'm gonna say that, our dynamo here who operates the platform, Sunny. So thank you to you three. And I'd like also to thank you, all of you who attended. You make this event possible. So keep coming back. And talking about coming back, tomorrow, October 5th, our next session will be at 7 a.m. UTC, Universal Time. And it's going to be the first installment of the Best Practices stream. So until then, thank you very much. Stay safe. Have a good rest of your day, evening, night, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.